I'm very happy to welcome you all, and especially welcome Émile Frison among us, who will share his view on agroecology as a tool for food system transformation just in a bit. It's really a pleasure again to close this mini series of 3 lectures, which are part of a curriculum course here at ETH Zurich on agroecology. And we are very happy that within this curricular course, during the 3 lectures, we can open the virtual doors and sit around a virtual table to share different perspectives on agroecology with you all. So the aim indeed is to offer diverse perspectives into the field of agroecology and provide some exploration of the benefits and potential of agroecology in advancing sustainable food system, an issue which is pressing globally and very important, but also address some of the challenges and constraints within this dynamic field, full of trade-offs, but also full of synergies and potential. After a science perspective of Johanna, a policy perspective of Laura, it's now a pleasure to have a broader perspective provided by Émile Frison, who will talk about the transformation potential of agroecology. And I guess it's a really great pleasure to have Émile with us, because he builds up on a year-long or decade-long experience within the fields of agricultural sciences, conservation sciences, but also agricultural biodiversity. He was head of Biodiversity International for 10 years. He studied agricultural sciences, spent most of his career in international agricultural research for development, and is now still very close to the topic of agroecology through his role as senior advisor to the Agroecology Coalition, a coalition which is a result of the Food System Summit, where different coalitions were established around topics of holistic nature and of importance. So besides all what I've mentioned, it's also nice that Émile joins us the second time here at the World Food System Center as a guest lecturer. It must be around 8 years ago, when he presented physically. Before Corona, we had much more physical meetings than now. We also learned that virtual exchanges are also nice and have a big potential. He joined us at ETH to introduce an IPES food report, where he was the main author on From Uniformity to Diversity, a paradigm shift from industrial agriculture to diversified agroecological systems. So it's something which already around 8 years ago, we had the joy to listen to Émile, and it's now also the joy to hear again what has changed, where are we now, and what is the power of agroecology towards food system transformation. This graph, we started always with this. This is the backbone also of the course, the 13 principles of agroecology. I don't go into detail this time, even less than last time, and even less than before, but it's important to emphasize, and I guess that's also a key message I expect to hear today, is that talking about agroecology, we talk about things on an agri-ecosystem, on a farm level. We talk about, at the same time, also on issues on food system level, which do have direct connection to society far beyond the farm gate, but within all our societies. And then we talk about small little changes within the system, mainly on practice level, where we change some of the agricultural practices, but agroecology encompasses much more. It goes into a complete different perspective on global food systems based on participation, localness, fairness, and justice. And within this bandwidth, we're discussing agroecology also today. And I'm really looking forward to also hear Emil's view on this. If it happens you're in Zurich the day after tomorrow, please join us for our Food Day, our annual symposium. There we will present the work done by researchers which are engaged in the World Food System Center, and you can learn from a broad range of different disciplines, different entry points on how research can support transformation of sustainable food systems. Enough with ads at this point. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Emil. Emil will give an input of around 30 minutes. And of course, after that, we open the floor for questions. You are free to directly ask questions to Emil, or as in the last two times, we collected questions on the chat, and I'm also happy to then somehow combine similar questions to one question and transfer them to Emil. Without any further blah blah from my side, it's now time for the essence. Emil, thank you very much for being with us tonight. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for this nice introduction. Can you see my presentation?
Perfectly. Thank you.
So I'm going to move very rapidly through what is wrong with our current systems. I'm sure you're all familiar with the impact of our food systems on greenhouse gases, biodiversity losses, pollution of soil, air, and water, the actual vulnerability to climate change of our industrial model of agriculture, the fact that we are still not making progress on the triple burden of malnutrition. In the last 5-6 years, we have an increasing number of hungry people instead of a decreasing number, as is promised in the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's still maintaining great social inequity. And the reason why I'm putting this on the slide here is that all these points are directly associated with our current food systems based on an industrial model of agriculture. There have been an impressive, you heard already the report that IPS Food produced in 2016. Since that, there's been an impressive number of major reports by IPBES, TEEB, the IPCC, several reports of that, the high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security, all calling for transformational change. They are all saying that incremental improvements of our current model is not going to be enabling us to address the stresses and shocks that we are facing today. They also all mention agroecology as an important way forward to address the current challenges. As was mentioned already by Martin, I really started working on agrobiodiversity quite some time ago, actually a very long time ago, on agricultural biodiversity and how it contributes to more sustainable and resilient food systems. I started IPS Food in 2014 and was the lead author of this first report of IPS Food from Uniformity to Diversity. And I was also involved in the creation of the Agroecology Coalition. I would use a slightly different wording from what Martin mentioned, as I consider that the coalition doesn't come out of the Food System Summit. I would say it emerged despite the Food System Summit. There was a lot of resistance from the Food System Summit Secretariat to have too much visibility given to agroecology. Actually, in the agenda of the pre-summit of the Food System Summit, the word agroecology did not appear anywhere. And it was a big fight to bring countries and organizations to demand that this be corrected. And this eventually led to the creation of the coalition. I have been the coordinator of that coalition since its inception in July 2021 until February 2023, when we hired 3 permanent staff to be the secretariat, and I continue as a senior advisor to the secretariat of the coalition. I'll come back to that later on. So this transformational change, it's really about redesigning the system. It's a different paradigm, and which I call diversified agroecological systems, in order to address simultaneously economic, environmental, climate mitigation and adaptation, health, social and cultural objectives, and no longer have an agricultural sector that wants to maximize productivity and looks only at the economic direct impact without paying attention to the environmental or health impact, and leave alone the social impact, and so on. So we really want to see an integrated approach that addresses all these aspects at the same time. You are familiar with the 13 principles, but it's important to pay more attention to the social aspects that are more linked to the entire food system. These are often forgotten. People are still thinking about agroecology, or too many people are still thinking about agroecology as a very narrow set of agricultural practices. I do no longer refer to the 5 levels of Gliessman, and it's something that I discussed with Gliessman, and he fully agrees, because there's been a lot of misconception. In his own definition, agroecology starts at level 3. The level 1 and 2 is an evolution of the current system. It's incremental changes by increasing slightly the efficiency of the current system, or by doing input substitution. And these are not transformational. They are just incremental improvements. And agroecology, which is a redesign of the system, actually starts at level 3 of Gliessman. And because of that often confusion, I'm not using that any longer. As I said, the importance of the social dimensions dealing with fairness, social equity, connectivity, participation, and governance, those are issues, and of course, co-creation of knowledge in a co-innovation and participatory mode. Those are more social aspects that are extremely important for any successful transformation through agroecology. I am not going to go through these slides in detail, but I'm just wanting to show that the 13 principles are well aligned with the 10 elements of agroecology that were agreed by FAO and the FAO Council in November, December 2019. It's a different way of cutting the pie, but it covers the same content. And the HLP principles are slightly more operational and give more guidance, and therefore I prefer to use the 13 principles. But I left this in my presentation, which is shared with you, in order to see the linkages between the 13 principles and the 10 elements. So these 13 principles form a package. It's not a picking list where you say, well, in this project, I will address this one principle. We should always try to address the full set of 13 principles in order to be effective in transformation. These principles are applicable everywhere and at all scales, but what happens on the ground, what you do on the ground, is very location and situation specific. The principles are a useful guide for the design of projects or initiatives. And as I said already, the social dimensions are very important, because building social capital is crucial for the long-term application of the transformation. It's not just learning some techniques. We must build the social capital that goes with it. And really, these principles also form the basis of food sovereignty. So this different paradigm, I repeat again, it's not just a set of agricultural practices. It's also very innovation and knowledge intensive. It takes the best of all innovations, but those that are compatible with the 13 principles of agroecology, not any innovation. There are innovations that actually run counter the principles of agroecology, and these should be avoided. And it's combining this modern science with traditional and farmer knowledge. But it's also about changing the social relations, empowering farmers, adding value locally, privileging short value chains, linking consumers and producers. So it's a holistic, integrated approach to reach economic, environmental, climate, health, social, and cultural objectives, and achieving actually the sustainable development goals in a holistic way. So, of course, the situation is very different. If we start from an unsustainable industrial model in many industrialized countries, or we start from underperforming subsistence agriculture in many developing countries, the principles apply in the same way, but what you do has to be adapted to the local conditions. And we strive towards diversified agroecological systems that are resilient and sustainable. There are now examples of agroecology at scale in different parts of the world. I'm just listing a few here, a few examples. The farmer-managed natural regeneration in the Sahel has been put in place now on millions of hectares and is regreening the Sahel in those parts. In Andhra Pradesh, we have now more than 850,000 farmers that have been practicing agroecology or natural farming, as they call it. And a recent study that was published just 2 months ago has shown that those farmers practicing natural farming or agroecology are having productivity that is 11% higher than the farmers that are still continuing conventional chemical-based agriculture, but with a 50% higher net income because of the productivity increase and combined with the savings on input costs. There is also a lot of social movements. For example, the Alliance for Agroecology in West Africa is bringing together 72 organizations that collaborate, that are practicing agroecology and that collaborate in advocacy efforts, etc. Farmer organizations such as ROPA and AFA have adopted agroecology in their strategy, and more national policies are supporting agroecology. I list just a few countries here as examples, but those are increasing, I would say, almost every month. We have now enough evidence that agroecology can be equally productive than high input chemical agriculture, that it provides higher income, that has also been clearly demonstrated. But what is extremely important, especially for smallholder farmers that have no reserves, is the greater resilience and stability that is provided by agroecological systems, and that is to a large extent due to the diversification in the systems and improvement of soil health. From an environmental impact, this is putting carbon in the soil and turning agriculture into a climate solution rather than being a significant problem. It's increasing biodiversity, it's restoring degraded land, and this is, again, a very important aspect. More than 1/3 of the agricultural land is degraded or badly degraded, and a lot of it is abandoned from cultivation. And the only way to put that back into culture is through agroecology, and that's the only way to avoid further deforestation. We must restore the degraded land. And of course, it's improving ecosystem services, whether it's water or nutrient cycling, pollination, or pest and disease management. But it also has very positive nutrition and health outcomes. First, it avoids the negative impact of pesticides and antibiotics or nitrates in water that is associated with industrial agriculture. More than 200,000 people die of pesticide acute poisoning every year. and tens of millions are getting sick because of the use of pesticides, plus all the problems related to antibiotic resistance that is increasing in different parts of the world. It's providing for diverse, healthy diets, and also has increased levels of beneficial nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids or polyphenols. And there's a whole report of IPES Food on this. This report that you can find on the IPES Food website is also talking about the huge cost, and there we are talking about trillions of dollars per year. Imagine, I mean, I have difficulty, I can't realize what a trillion actually means, but we are talking about orders of magnitude bigger than anything that we are familiar with. And that's the cost to human health alone. To that, you have to add the cost to the environment, etc. But just using a fraction of this amount would invested in transforming our food systems would allow us to make huge savings in our health bill. And of course, the social and cultural outcomes that are often overlooked in different analysis, it's allowing to build social capital. It provides more employment and better employment throughout the year, and it is re-establishing closer links between producers and consumers. It is bringing back into cultivation a lot of diversity of traditional crops that are culturally important, and it integrates the traditional knowledge and values the traditional knowledge of farmers, of indigenous people, etc. So transformation based on the implementation of those 13 principles doesn't require only changes in production practices. It really requires changes in the knowledge generation and transmission, changes in social and economic relations, and changes in the institutional framework. Knowing all of that, why are things not changing faster? And that's something that already was reported in the IPES Food Report in 2016. We identified 8 what we call lock-ins, things that slow or prevent an actual transformation. And I don't have time to go in each of them, but for example, export orientation. Too many countries put a lot of effort into growing export crops, which is still going back to colonial times when the colonial powers were favoring the cultivation of crops that served their own needs. And that is still continuing today. Compartmentalized thinking, that the different sectors don't talk to each other. They still continue operating on different parallel tracks. Short-term thinking, transformation of a food system is not happening overnight. We need longer-term planning, and that's difficult for politicians, etc. But one that I want to insist on here is also the concentration of power in the agri-food business. And there, IPES Food also produced a report that you find on the website on the concentration of power in the agri-food business. And this shows, for example, that just a handful of companies are controlling the vast majority of whether it's commercial seeds, fertilizers, agrochemicals, research and development in poultry or pigs, and the global grain trade. And those have a vested interest in maintaining the current system in place. They influence policies in countries. They invest large amounts of money in lobbying countries and decision makers in maintaining the current system in place. So if we want to change the paradigm, if we want to implement this transformation, we will need to address all these lock-ins. Changes policy towards more emphasis being put on food production for local consumption. The other aspect that is very important is the measures of success. As long as we continue just to focus on tons per hectare of a major commodity, we will be overlooking what is really important, which is to produce the right nutrition to the people that need it, to provide the necessary ecosystem services, to bring about fairness, etc., things that really matter. So we must change and develop and use indicators of sustainable food systems. Just a few words about the Agroecology Coalition. This was indeed created in 2021. It counts now actually 47 countries and 3 regional commissions: the African Union Commission, the ECOWAS Commission, and the European Commission. And as of today, 146 organizations. And that number is increasing every month. The purpose of the coalition is to accelerate the transformation of food systems through agroecology, guided by the 13 principles, which, as I said, are aligned with the 10 elements that have been officially adopted by FAO. The coalition has 3 main areas of work. One is about facilitating the co-creation and exchange of knowledge. One is about promoting increased investment in agroecology. And the third one is seeking political engagement and commitment to agroecology to create the necessary enabling environment for an agroecological transformation. And the coalition, which has a steering group, but then the operational part of it is 5 working groups: 1 on research, innovation, and education, 1 on policy. On policy, it operates both at international level, trying to influence the Rio Conventions, for example, bring in the role of agroecology in climate, in biodiversity, in desertification. 1 on financing and investments, which looks at mobilizing more resources for agroecology and more investment, also by the countries themselves in their agricultural budgets and food system budgets. 1 on implementation, which aims to exchange experiences about practical projects implemented on the ground, and 1 on communication, which is also an important component of getting the message out on what is possible and what can be done through agroecology. So to conclude, some key messages I want to leave behind is that we need fundamentally different food systems. Tweaking or improving the current model of agriculture based on high input of chemical inputs is not going to do the trick. We need diversified agroecological systems, and they are defined and inspired by the 13 principles that you're all familiar with now. These systems are economically performing, particularly under environmental stress. They are equitable and just, and the basis of food sovereignty, and they allow us to adapt to climate change, protect the environment, increase biodiversity. And what is important is to be convinced the change is already happening. We are not talking about something that might come in the future that we must still test. The change is happening, and it's happening at scale now in more and more countries. And the Agroecology Coalition that is now bringing together an increasing number of organizations and countries is a real opportunity to do this acceleration that we all need and in the transformation of our food systems. So with that, I'd like to thank you. Here are the links to both IPES Food and the Coalition website, and a short video on YouTube on agroecology. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emil, for this overview and very interesting kind of broad picture you shared with us. And indeed, there are already quite some questions. Now I lost the chat. Oh, here we are. Sorry. quite some questions in the chat entering, but also for everyone who is in here. So if you want to directly ask a question, just raise your hand and we give you the floor. But maybe we start with a kind of a definition question, which arrived as first question. You were speaking about an increase of productivity and income. And then the question is, how is productivity defined here in detail or concretely? What do you mean when you talk about productivity?
In this case, it is total production per hectare. In the situation is in India, for example, they now manage to have several crops in a season, which was not possible under conventional agriculture because there was not sufficient, especially soil moisture. And with the better soil health and water retention capacity in agroecological systems, they are now able to produce. So it's yield increases through agroecology. And this is to counter what is still said too often, is that agroecology is less productive than industrial or conventional agriculture, which is based on data that go back to quite some time, data that are essentially from industrialized countries, from comparisons made over a short period of time, and where they are essentially doing input substitution. So it's a very narrow interpretation of organic agriculture, just doing the input substitution, and therefore it's normal that under those circumstances productivity is lower. But that's not what agroecology can offer. Agroecology can offer much more if you transform your system through the 13 principles. Then you are able to achieve actually higher productivity in terms of yields. And of course, the saving on inputs, on chemical inputs, allows you to increase your net income significantly.
Thank you. There is the next question is a question on the chance of success a bit. Where do you think will be the global hotspot for the transition of diversified agroecological systems? Is it more in developed countries with technologies and knowledge, but the system has developed in a certain way already and the structures are set? Or is it more in developing countries with less technology and probably less knowledge? That's doubtful, but with a lot of room and flexibility for improvement. So where do you think is the way we should focus?
I think we really have to focus on both. And I don't like, that's also something that you often hear. Yes, agroecology, it's well adapted to smallholder farmers in developing countries. Of course, they start from a different point, often a system that is still more diverse, especially in Africa. They still have many systems that are more diverse, and therefore some of the gains that can be obtained through agroecology actually can be faster under those circumstances than if you have a system where you have used for a long time a lot of chemical inputs, and where the soil is really a dead substrate, and you have to rebuild soil health over several years before having the full benefits of an agroecological transformation. But it works everywhere. There are large-scale farms, whether it's in France, in Canada, in Quebec, in Bulgaria. There are large-scale farms, 200, 600, 2,000 hectares, that are implementing agroecology. Here in Italy, 600 hectare farm, not so far away from where I live. This works, and the reason why things are not changing faster is really the lock-ins that I mentioned earlier, and the influence that a lot of the agrochemical companies have on national policies. You hear the discussion that's ongoing again about the extension of glyphosate in Europe, The authorization to continue to use glyphosate is under discussion again, while a few years ago, a decision was made to extend it for 5 years, and that's it. Now, under very strong lobby from the input companies, this is under debate again, and there will be another vote at the European Commission. So those kind of obstacles are really what slows us down. And the fact that there is no significant investment in facilitating the transformation, especially in, as I said, in lands that is very badly degraded, that require high levels of chemical inputs to get a decent yield. If you do the transition there, you will see a drop in productivity in the first few years. If farmers are not helped through that period, if they don't receive support for the transformation, it will be very risky for them to embark on this transformation. And that's why many farmers would wish today to be able to transform, but they are afraid of not making it because they are lacking support. Too much if you take the example of Europe, too much of the subsidies is still going per hectare, making the very big farms better off, and where small farms have a great difficulty in making a decent living. Yeah.
There are a few questions which are linked to it, and I have some troubles to decide. But there was one question on the co-creation of knowledge. You mentioned in your answer, but also in your presentation, the importance of local knowledge and bridging between science and local knowledge.
Can you just hold on? I'm going to turn off my telephone.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the question was really on co-creation and also making knowledge available. So there was a question on, are supermarkets maybe a good way to be used to support agroecology? Or here another question is around the kind of ensure participatory methods and dialogues to really reach the people which are most affected by the side effect of the current system, and who is able to speak up and bring in their perspective. So how can we ensure that what is also defined in the 13 principles in the social dimensions, how can we bring that more to the front, as you mentioned also in your presentation?
Well, actually, I didn't probably spend enough or pay enough attention in my presentation to the consumption side, but this is equally important. We cannot have a radical transformation on the production side if there is no transformation on the consumption side, and vice versa. We cannot expect consumers to change radically if the producers continue to produce the same in the same way. So the role of supermarkets can be very different. Today, most of the supermarkets are actually badly exploiting farmers because they, through their big suppliers that are these platforms that buy the bulk of the inputs and then sell it to the supermarkets. The power relation between those platforms and the farmers is just too uneven, and that's why in many situations farmers are confronted with having to sell below the production cost in some years, in some seasons, etc., which is due to the actual overly big power of the big buyers that are supplying the supermarkets. So supermarkets can also play a positive role if they engage with local producers, have much shorter supply chains, as some are starting to do. So it's not that the word supermarket per se is good or bad, it's the way they are behaving. If they continue to be supplied through these anonymous long value chains where the most important is to get the cheapest price at all costs, or whether they have a social responsibility and engage with local producers. On the issue of co-creation of knowledge, it's very unfortunate that still a lot of the education of agricultural and broader food system scientists is very much in the old model where, you know, scientists know and then they will tell others what to do. There is no education to participatory approaches in the curricula, and I think that's a big gap. We have to teach young scientists on how to do participatory research and to value the knowledge of the people working in the value chains in the food systems. They have valuable knowledge, and we must really bring those two together through co-creation. And that can be very powerful if it's done properly. But unfortunately, too few people are trained in doing that. And that's also one significant obstacle.
Thank you. That leads a bit to the next question in terms of measuring outcome of food systems. And you mentioned the need for different indicators to measure it. How can we, for example, measure the social aspects, the principles also linked to social aspects in food system? What kind of indicators should be established? At which level? Do you have examples of countries who work on the development of new indicators? So if you could, Trent, give us a bit of insight on that, what you mentioned, there is a need for new indicators because we have to have a different look at the system. We have to measure differently. We have to have a more long-term perspective. How can we deal with it? What are promising examples? How do you see that?
One aspect is true cost accounting. So far, all the externalities of agriculture, to take an example, have not been taken into consideration any economic calculation of the price of goods, the impact on health, the impact on the environment, etc. Those were the problems of the health sector or the environment sector, and this was not entering into the calculation of a food price. Now, TEEB agri-food, which is the economics of ecosystem services and biodiversity applied to agriculture and food, developed methodology to do this measurement of what really matters. And for example, the example I gave in Andhra Pradesh and the higher income and better productivity, that were not the only results. They also looked at, for example, the expenses of households on medical costs, the number of days off work because of illness. And those two factors were like 25% lower in the case of farmers that were practicing agroecology compared to others. There are other dimensions on, for example, biodiversity, not just on the crops that you grow, but wild biodiversity coming back in production systems. I visited Andhra Pradesh in 2020, and one thing that struck me was to look at the face of people involved in that. And the people there were smiling. You could see that people were happy. And not just because they had more money, because they were more involved, they were engaged, they were in control of their destiny, if you want. And so that kind of social aspect is something that is extremely difficult to measure, but that really matters. And one other indicator, you all have heard about the large number of farmer suicides in India. Now, out of those 850,000 farmers in Andhra Pradesh, there hasn't been a single suicide in those communities that have converted to agroecology. That's again another very important indicator that would never have been looked at before.
Yeah. Do you have time for 2-3 more questions? Or
go ahead.
Good. There is a question on around the topic of greenwashing of terms. And maybe I read it out because it's a complex question, but worthwhile thinking about it. So, given recent trends of greenwashing through terms like regenerative agriculture or for meat production, how can we ensure that agroecology isn't similarly co-opted for deceptive environmental claims? What are strategies or criteria which can be established to authenticate genuine adherence to agroecological practices in animal-based systems? So this is a question which really is reverting to the very complex interactions of food systems if you then also take animals into account. So interesting to hear.
Maybe a first word about animal systems before I talk about greenwashing. There's still a lot of also misinformation, or let's say maybe not misinformation, very partial information that is going around about the environmental impact, for example, of animal systems. To me, there are very clearly animal systems that should disappear. The CAFOs, the very large scale concentrated animal rearing that represent a health risk from a zoonotic disease point of view, that are extremely polluting. And some of that do a very partial calculation on greenhouse gas production per kilo of milk produced or per kilo of beef produced, forgetting about the greenhouse gases in the production of the food that these animals eat, etc. So there's a lot of misinformation still, or very partial information going around. I think the role that animals can play in diverse systems, in mixed farming systems where you have animals and crops, the role they play there in fertilization of land, etc., must all be taken into consideration in an integrated way. Coming now to the greenwashing issue, indeed, a lot of many people use the term regenerative agriculture to mean actually a very few agricultural practices like no-till agriculture or precision agriculture. And these few activities are supposed to be put forward as a solution, but they are only incremental improvements. And I think we had in 2021, just before the Food System Summit, different organizations, the Agroecology Europe, IPES Food, Regeneration International, IFOAM Organics International, FEEBLE, and an NGO that I forgot now. We held a series of workshops to define what do we have in common, what can we fight for together, rather than insisting on different definitions of organic versus regenerative versus agroecology. And very quickly in these workshops, we agreed that we all were standing behind the 13 principles. Whether it's IFOAM Organics International or Regeneration International, and we published a call for food system transformation through 13 principles. We didn't use any adjectives to it, agroecology or regenerative, etc. And we say applying those 13 principles is something that all these organizations stand behind. This was signed by more than 270 organizations from around the world and by more than 850 scientists and food chain workers. And so that's what really matters, is what we put behind the scene. Even Agroecology, CropLife International, the lobbying arm of the pesticide companies in Brussels, on their website, you find a definition of agroecology that, of course, involves the use of pesticides and particularly glyphosate. And so there is greenwashing going on, even with the term agroecology, which we must be aware of and fight. But that's why we insist always not just using, for example, agroecology, but be specific that it's about implementing the 13 principles.
Thank you. So 2 more questions, and then we try to come to an end. Thank you for your patience and time. So the question of land and natural resource governance, how does that enter into the agroecological transition? And maybe link to it, that's written in the question. So would an agroecological transition from a land and land use governance perspective without transforming our capitalist system be possible? Is that also, do we need an entire different economic system, or can we bring agroecology also forward without changing the overall economic framework, political framework?
The land issue is extremely important. Access to land is one of the major limiting factors for an agroecological transformation as well. I didn't have time to go into that aspect. Actually, IPES Food is working on a report that should be published in a few months on the land issue and the important problems associated with access to land and land tenure and control over land, which is an essential basis of a sustainable production system. If you don't have tenure and control over your land, you will not invest into it to improve it over years. If the land can be taken away from you from one year to the next, as is the case in many places. Whether it's compatible with the capitalist system, I don't want to play too much with the words. What certainly has to change is the huge undue and unjustifiable influence of a financialized system, where the only thing that matters is making more money. Now more and more of companies are owned by investors that want to have more and more maximizing their income, and that that directs these companies to be just responsive to maximize the return on investment of their investors at the expense of anything else. And I think that overly important influence of the financial system, to me, is the major obstacle. I don't think that you have to undo the whole capitalist world. It's the excess of capitalism through the overly important weight that the financial institutions are now taking, that are controlling not only the market, but they are controlling the companies that are producing and really directing their policies just to maximize income. And the speculation that goes on companies as well as on commodities, the food price spikes that we have seen in 2008, 2009, and again in the COVID crisis, a significant part of that was due to speculation. And I think that's the kind of things that we have to fight. That's incompatible with sustainable transformation of food systems. And I don't think that necessarily capitalism has to be thrown out. Other models have also shown their shortcomings. So it's a matter of what kind of capitalism we are seeing as acceptable.
And which also encompasses various indicators, or an expansion of indicators, just to build bridge what we discussed earlier. Last topic, biodiversity conservation questions, two questions. I ask them together and then I hand over back. So are there some species that have been successfully conserved through agroecology? Would it be possible that countries set a goal for agroecology, a conservation goal also, and using agroecology as a means for critically endangered species, for example? Is that a potential agroecology can provide? Is that done somewhere? And then maybe the last question linked to it is, how can biodiversity help to reduce the reliance of agriculture on external inputs? And that's probably a nice closure then.
Okay. I think there are quite a number of examples where we have seen the new species coming back in a landscape that have disappeared before. I don't have, let's say, concrete data about species that were on the red list of IUCN, for example, that and the impact that agroecology has had on that. But I know that in many areas that have converted to agroecology, studies have been done on wildlife coming back on in those systems. And actually, if you look, there is more biodiversity, wild biodiversity in managed landscapes than there is in protected areas. Whatever percentage of protected areas now have less biodiversity than what is in managed landscapes. And therefore, converting those landscapes to agroecology allows to bring back insects, birds, small mammals, a whole range of biodiversity that rebuilds a more natural system that requires less chemical inputs, because it's recreating a kind of equilibrium between the different species, and you have no big outbreaks of diseases or plagues. So I think setting conservation goals is actually something that I have been personally fighting for in the context of the global biodiversity targets that have been adopted in Montreal in December last year. And unfortunately, that has not made it. There's been a very strong reluctance from the conservation world to look at things other than protected areas. They are still focusing so much on maximizing biodiversity conservation in protected areas at the expense of paying attention to managed landscapes, where agroecology can really play a significant role. And the data are available about the increased number of species and number of animals per species, for example, that are present in agroecological systems. What was the last biodiversity? Sorry.
Yeah, I have to quickly read it. Have to reduce the reliance of external inputs. What is the link between biodiversity and the reduction of?
Well, I've already briefly mentioned it. By diversifying the system, we create an environment in which is much less favorable for epidemic development of either diseases or insect pests, for example. And it recreates an environment where natural enemies exist with the pests and diseases, and you may have a little damage, but not justifying any treatments. And so in systems that have been in place for some years, where you have rebuilt your soil health, where you have really diversified significantly, you see that there is no need anymore for the use of pesticides, nor for chemical fertilizer inputs. And that there's still a lot to be learned from the soil microbiome and the role it plays in water use efficiency, in the control of pests and diseases, making plants more robust against these pests and diseases, etc. And one concrete example on the role of the soil microbiome in India, they have now introduced a new approach, what they call pre-monsoon dry seeding. Traditionally, a farmer would wait until the first rain, then they prepare the land, and at the second rain, they sow the seed. Now, through this, they are coating the seed with microbes coming from the cow gut, and these coated seeds with the microbes in that are able to absorb humidity from the air without rain and allow the seed to germinate before the first rain. So when the first rain comes, the plant already starts growing, and you gain several weeks of growth, which can be really making the difference between no or a very poor yield and a good yield. So this again is the result of participatory research between an Australian soil microbiologist and Indian farmers that shows the real potential of marrying traditional knowledge with modern science.
Thank you very much for ending with this very promising and nice picture on a marriage between science and practice. Thank you very much, Emil, for your time with us, for sharing your knowledge, for your openness to go through these questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for being with us tonight and the nights before, and we are looking forward to, in one form or another, continue this kind of mutual learning also in future. So thank you very much, Emil, for being with us. And
thank you. It was a pleasure.
See you soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.